Good morning. My name is Mark, and on behalf of the entire team here at the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, it is my pleasure to welcome you to On the Horizon, What to Expect in the Next Legislative Session. We would like to begin by thanking our sponsors. Our webinar series sponsors are the sponsors who support all of the Chamber's webinars efforts in 2024. They are AARP, Central Maine Power, Delta Dental, Kennebec Savings Bank, and Sun Life Insurance. Our supporting sponsors today are AmeriHealth Caritas. There are a few things we'd like you to know about this call. This meeting is being recorded, and we will make the recording available to you on our website at a later date. We brought you into the call with your audio muted, but you have the power to unmute yourself if needed. If you have any questions, please click the raise hand icon or type your question in the chat box. We will also use the chat panel to relay any links or useful materials. If you lose your connection, please use the same Zoom link to reconnect. Finally, in the event of a water landing, your seat cushion may be used as a flotation device. It is now my pleasure to introduce our captain this morning. He is the president and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, Patrick Woodcock. Good morning, Patrick.
Good morning, Mark, and good morning, all. Thank you for joining us this morning as we look forward to a new session. I first wanted to reiterate the support to the sponsors of this event. For those who I have not had the opportunity to meet, my name is Patrick Woodcock. I am recently returning to Maine as the president and CEO of the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. I've been with the chamber now for about 3 months, and it was wonderful to be back in the State House on Tuesday to the familiar activity, and it was stirring again at the State House. It's going to be an active session. As we look forward to informing all of you about what we see as the key priorities, one theme that I think provides a thread through all the issues is really that there are key issues that Maine has the opportunity to apply best practices from other states, implement practical revisions, or to be an outlier. And when we established our priorities in talking to the legislative leadership and the governor on all of those issues, we really do see some significant potential for the business climate in Maine. And I did want to begin on the key issues and then introduce the team to go through them specifically. But one is an issue that will be a legacy outside of the legislature, but really is one that will be with the business community through this year. And that's the biggest regulatory undertaking in decades, the paid family medical leave. We recently wrote the governor on 4 requests on the implementation and met with her last week. The rulemaking will be commencing this month, and will have a profound impact on businesses starting this time next year. PFAS is another topic that we think the legislature must act this session, or there will be severe consequences for anybody that manufactures products in the state of Maine. There's been productive conversations on this topic with the administration and the committee, but the current law needs to be amended and needs to be amended before session adjourns. We are also following the privacy legislation. This is another example where there's some best practices that we think improves protection of consumer privacy, but also protects businesses that use commercial efforts to target customers in a way that ensures that Maine businesses will be able to access the entire new theater of business activity on the internet. And then lastly, we do think there are some key issues as we look at potential business budget surplus with ensuring that the state focuses on long-term growth. And that becomes a focus on investing in research and development, and also ensuring that our tax climate is competitive. With that, I want to dive into these issues with the key staff at the Chamber and provide an introduction. First, Linda Caprara. I think all of us know Linda. She's been with the Chamber for a number of years. Linda, please introduce yourself.
Good morning, everyone. Happy New Year. I'm Linda Caprara. I'm Vice President of Advocacy for the Maine State Chamber of Commerce, and I handle tax issues, budget issues, and kind of all of issues that we need to deal with here at the Chamber. Thanks. Nice to see you all.
Now we'll turn to Ashley Lusky, who started on the same day as I did at the Chamber. Ashley has a lot of experience with the legislature. Ashley, please introduce yourself.
Hi, good morning. My name's Ashley Lusky. As Patrick indicated, I'm a government relations specialist here at the Chamber and will be covering energy and environmental issues.
And newly arrived to the Chamber is Jake LaChance, who started this week. Jake, please introduce yourself.
Hi there, all. I know I've had some conversations with some of you folks already, but my name is Jake LaChance. I'll be here as a government relations specialist at the Chamber working on labor and HR issues. So really excited to get involved with this legislative session and kind of jump in with both feet right out of the gate.
Thank you for the introductions. We did want to do a deep dive on the key issues with all of the advocacy staff. And I'll turn to Linda on her key issues that she's following in her issue areas. Linda.
Hi, everyone. First, I just kind of want to give an overview of the session. This is the second session of the 131st legislature. The legislature convened last Wednesday, which was the 3rd of January. They are up and running. They are in full swing this week with public hearings and work sessions. As Patrick said, we have a lot of major issues to deal with this session, a lot of major issues. There's a number of carryover bills that I'll talk about in a minute, but overall the session's going to be, at least in January, they're going to meet Tuesday, Thursdays. In February, they're going to start meeting Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. So they're going to add a day in February, really just because of the workload. And like I said last session, if you recall, last January, I made a prediction they're going to get out in July, and everyone looked at me like I was crazy. But what happened? They got out in July. This year, I'm making a prediction. The statutory adjournment is the 17th of April, but I'm thinking they're probably going to get out sometime in the middle of May, just because of the workload they have. And as you know, this is an election year, so they're going to want to get on the road and really get out there and campaign. So it's going to be interesting to see over the session kind of how they posture themselves politically, because there's a lot of really key issues like guns that are going to be discussed. There's going to be legislation on after the Lewiston incident, but it's going to be a session that's going to be fast-paced, very condensed, and very difficult. So hang on. So what are we facing? Well, in terms of carryovers, we've got about I actually totaled them, 324 carryovers. Bills that are in the committees. There's about 100 new pieces of legislation that they've introduced. And I'm going to go over the carryovers because folks want to know what committees are carrying how many carryovers. In agriculture, there's 13. In appropriations, there's 23. In criminal justice, 16. Education's 12. Energy and utilities is 19. The ENR committee is 11. Housing is 33. I'm sorry, Health and Human Services is 33. Insurance and Financial Services is 20. Housing is 22. IF&W has 8. The IDEA Committee has 17. The Judiciary Committee has 26. Labor has 17. Marine Resources has 5. State and local government has 16. The Taxation Committee has 38. That's a record. I've not seen that in 30 years. Transportation is 14, and Veterans Affairs is 24. So there's a lot of carryover bills that they got to deal with. And really this session, it's really about the depth of some of these issues, very difficult issues they carried over from last session. They attempted to work through some of these carryover bills this past fall, but they didn't get through a lot. So really, they have their work cut out for themselves. So kind of what are we looking at in terms of the parties, and what are they looking at in terms of issues this session? Well, I kind of did some research, and I'm kind of just going to throw some of these out there. The Senators have really indicated that child welfare reforms and mental health is kind of some of the things, lower tax burden, some of the things that they're looking at. The House R's energy, mental health, child protective services. Child protective services is on both parties' agendas this year because of what has been happening in the Department of Health and Human Services with respect to child protection cases. So that is going to be a key issue this session that they're all going to want to deal with. Help for communities after the storm, they indicated, and lowering the tax burden. Senate D's, childcare, housing, increased teacher wages, veterans issues, and healthcare for child care as well. And I guess I will say also on the R side that child care and housing is a major issue as well. House D's, housing, gun safety, and access to education and healthcare. So these are a lot of the issues that they're going to want to deal with this year. We have, I'm assuming there's going to be some bills that are going to be introduced through Legislative Council, a few bills probably, but we're looking at kind of the grand scheme of things, what I just said and indicated. In terms of my issues, I will say that the Taxation Committee is meeting this Tuesday. They met Tuesday, and they're meeting Thursday today. They've got a number of bills on their plate that we're watching, but I'm just going to touch on some of the higher issues, if you will. We have two bills right now that we have carried over that we initiated from last session. One deals with childcare, and the other deals with R&D. LD 643, Mo Terry sponsored that for us. And what that will do, it deals with the R&D tax credit. Currently, right now, the current tax credit is really unworkable for companies because what you have to do is you have to look back 3 years of what you've expended on R&D, take the average, and if you go above that average, then you can take the credit. So it's problematic for companies that budget the same every year. So what we've done is we've lowered that threshold from 100% above and beyond what you've expended, the average of what you've expended, to 50%. So it makes it more workable and it encourages R&D. So that bill was carried over. Mo Terry sponsored it. LD 1222. This bill Trace Stewart sponsored for us. It's a child care bill. And what this would do is allow employers an income tax credit of up to 50% of the amount expended, either in kind or direct, reimbursement to employees, or $3,000 per child, whichever is lower. There's a couple other child care credit bills in the committee that I'm assuming they're going to meld at least all of them into one. That's what we're going to work towards. I know we've talked to the sponsor, Mo Terry. She's definitely interested in, she's sponsoring the other child care tax credit bill. So I think that we're going to have some conversations around this. Hopefully they will pass something with respect to child care though, because it's a hugely important issue. LD 1337, corporate disclosure. We saw this last year. We almost killed it in committee. They wanted to carry it forward because the sponsor requested it. This is corporate disclosure. If you are a subchapter S Corp or a C Corp in the state of Maine and you file a tax return, you would have to file a corporate disclosure return and disclose all of your tax information from your return on this corporate disclosure form. That would be available on a searchable database online for your friends, your family, and your competitors to see. So we adamantly oppose this bill. There's a number of bills in the legislature right now in different committees that deal with this issue of corporate disclosure indirectly. Some of these other bills are attempting to get at disclosures for health and human services issues, protective cases, but inadvertently, they actually wrap us into it. So there's a couple bills that I'm following in other committees that LD 1725, if you want to know, and 1948, Craig Hickman and the speaker are sponsoring that. Also, Rick Bennett has an 1804 disclosure bill that we're going to be looking at in tax today. So there's a lot of those bills. There's two local option tax bills that have been carried over. These would authorize a municipality to adopt a local option tax up to 1% if it was approved by a local referendum. So these bills have always been defeated by the legislature. It becomes a service center rural community issue. So hopefully we can defeat those again. There's an R&D tax bill before appropriations, a bond bill, LD 416. This is the $100 million R&D bond bill. And as Patrick indicated, we met with the governor and really stressed the need for R&D in the state and the need for innovation. It was mentioned in the main strategic plan. It's something that really moves the state forward, and we need to really invest here in the state very strongly on that. So we urged her to put some money from the surplus, the $265 million surplus that they have, reprojected revenues, towards, bond bill, or perhaps towards companies that potentially will suffer some hardship for the paid family medical leave program. So that is in a nutshell. There's another bill, a lease bill, that deals with leases in state and out of state. We're going to be following that as well, LD 2000. And the other bill I'm following is before the IDEA committee. The last thing I'll mention is abuse of dominance. Basically, this bill would allow anyone to bring a private right of action against a business that they believe to be, having more of a market share, a dominant market share, if you will. And that dominant market share would be 60% as a seller and 50% as a buyer. That's not going to be hard to meet here in the state of Maine. We have a lot of niche markets. We have a lot of entrepreneurs. We have a lot of things what we're doing here with respect to innovation. And what this bill really tries to do is overturn U.S. antitrust laws related to protecting the consumer and promoting lower prices, innovation, and competition. It really tries to adopt a European model that really focuses on the competitor out there, and how if that one competitor is, feels that they are unfairly being treated and they're not being able to compete, it really doesn't protect the consumer, and that's the most important thing. The testimony, we provided testimony yesterday before the IDEA committee. We're hopeful that committee, the administration actually provided testimony in opposition to the bill. We're hoping that committee votes ought not to pass on this. I think it really would result in massive lawsuits for companies across the state, because anybody could potentially accuse a company of being dominant in their market. A little grocery store that's the only grocery store in a particular town, they could come and say, well, you're abusing your power. You're the only, grocery store in the town. So it really has a lot of potential for, I think, really being very destructive here in Maine. So hopefully we can kill that bill. With that is in a nutshell. We have a lot of concept drafts that we're watching, a lot more bills, but those are some of the major bills we're watching in taxation and budget. I'm going to turn it over to Ashley. Thank you.
Hello again. All right, so as I mentioned, I'll be covering the Environment and Natural Resources Committee, and just kind of going to go through what's going on over there, specifically regarding PFAS, as that's going to continue to be a really big issue for the chamber. As Linda mentioned, 11 bills were carried over from the first session. 3 of those bills deal with PFAS, 2 of which are concept drafts. Around another 10 have been referred to the committee so far. The Environment and Natural Resources Committee is meeting on Wednesdays and Thursdays right now, although it doesn't look like they have anything scheduled for the next 2 weeks. As mentioned, PFAS will continue to be a really big issue for the chamber this session. As you may recall, the original law that was passed required a reporting date for companies of January 1st, 2023. The chamber and the business community worked really hard to get this delayed. That new reporting date is January 1st, 2025. However, we've heard from many of our members that it can take them years to find out if PFAS exists in a product they sell or manufacture, in addition to determining what the chemical compound of the PFAS is. As an example, IDEX, which has more than 10,000 employees, including chemists, scientists. They presented to the ENR committee late this past fall on the complexity of finding out from businesses that they receive parts from whether or not they contain PFAS. So certainly if this is a challenge for huge companies like IDEX, it's really going to be a challenge for our smaller businesses too. Just in determining and hearing from businesses they may receive parts from in order to manufacture their product. The supply chain essentially is the issue in trying to determine if a product has PFAS or not. So the chamber is working really hard to eliminate the reporting requirement and allow businesses to find out if their product contains PFAS, if there's some other way to continue manufacturing. That, of course, is the goal, to get PFAS out of our environment, out of our drinking water, and then to put in place some exemptions for businesses. So seeking statutory prohibitions, also exemptions. There are exemptions for products regulated by the FDA, FAA, DOD, and so forth. And so we're hoping that the committee and the Department of Environmental Protection will really look at what some of those exemptions are and consider them for Maine businesses in order to make this law a bit more workable for the business community. As Patrick mentioned, we have had some conversations, productive conversations with Commissioner Loisem of DEP and Governor Mills. We recognize the political makeup in Augusta and know that we really need the administration to be a partner and a louder voice if we're going to have these changes made during the short session. Try not to, take on too many substantial changes, but also enough that businesses can comply, because if we get to January 1st, 2025, and the reporting requirement isn't changed and a business can't report, they're basically banned from selling their product within the state of Maine. In energy, utilities, and technology, there were 19 bills carried over. Around 8 new bills have been referred thus far, and the committee is meeting on Tuesdays and Thursdays. There is some discussion that if needed, they'll also meet on Wednesdays, but haven't gotten to that point yet. Looking ahead, there doesn't seem to be any major bills before the committee, such as PFAS and ENR. However, we know how quickly that can change in Augusta. The committee is in full swing. On Tuesday, they heard a bill, LD 240, which aims to help commercial and residential tenants of multi-unit dwellings acquire broadband of their choice. So, while Maine doesn't currently have a law prohibiting this from taking place, a landlord could say to their, or a tenant could say to their landlord, I'd really like you to offer one internet service provider that the building doesn't currently have. The landlord could choose not to allow that from happening, for any number of reasons. LD 240 would place the jurisdiction of that within the Public Utilities Commission. The PUC does not oversee broadband services or landlord-tenant relationships. This legislation would also allow the PUC to adopt rules on requirements concerning the installation of wiring within existing and newly constructed buildings. So it really gives oversight to the PUC of, landlord-tenant relationships, building code, and the chamber just doesn't feel this is the appropriate way to encourage choice and competition within the marketplace. So we did testify in opposition to that legislation. Senator Jackson also has a bill in LD 1963 that would make changes to the process involving the renewable energy transmission project in northern Maine. As you may have heard or read, the PUC recently terminated the agreement for the transmission line in Aroostook County that was with LS Power Grid Maine, and the PUC has said they're reviewing risks that previously weren't addressed in the initial procurement process, and they hope to put out another request for proposals soon. Senator Jackson's bill would require the PUC, in collaboration with the governor's energy office, to seek other state and entities to partner with the procurement process. And, you know, really trying to make this project work, getting a transmission line from northern Maine to connect to the rest of the New England grid, and encouraging clean, renewable energy sources. Not in EUT, but also dealing with technology, are some right to repair bills before the Innovation, Development, Economic Advancement, and Business Committee. The chamber did testify in opposition to LD 1716, which would create a repairability index with DECD and require a label on a product or near pricing information to say what the product's repairability score would be, essentially. You know, this is a concern because the criteria is subjective. If a business doesn't make available free of charge some technical information, that would impact their score. This is a concern, you know, to the chamber. And then another area that Patrick mentioned is the privacy legislation. So in the Judiciary Committee, there are two comprehensive data privacy bills, LD 1973, sponsored by Senator Lisa Keim, and LD 1977, sponsored by Representative Maggie O'Neill. These two bills were carried over, and they seek to address how a business can collect, use, and sell data while protecting consumers. Around 14 states, I believe, have passed comprehensive data privacy bills. Maine has not, and this is certainly an area the chamber supports happening, but we want to make sure it's done thoughtfully and in a way that has consensus with other states so that the business community really can comply. We feel that LD 1973 is the best vehicle to do so, and would like to see some changes to that. LD 1977 really would make Maine an outlier if the committee passed that as is. I don't believe that's going to happen. The Judiciary Committee reviewed the two bills, kind of did a side-by-side on Tuesday. They met during the fall. They're having a work session again today, doing, you know, a side-by-side of each component of the bills. And I think what will likely end up happening is they'll pull, you know, some key things from both. I don't know whether or not they will use one bill or the other or create a new committee bill, but it looks like they'll be pulling components from both. As far as the chamber stance, again, we support a consensus framework that's been passed by other states. And we'd like to see exemptions for entities regulated by the Gramm-Leach-Bliley Act and HIPAA, as well as small businesses under a certain threshold of consumers who they collect data for. This has been done in several other states, such as Oregon and Virginia. We'd also like to see some more clearly defined definitions, particularly around sensitive data, and feel that enforcement is best left to the Attorney General rather than through a private right of action, which is in Representative O'Neill's bill. So that's what's going on with the committees I'm following.
And we'll turn to Jake.
Hi there all. Like I said earlier, my name is Jake LaChance, and I'll be following the labor and HR issues here for the Maine State Chamber of Commerce. As Linda said, there's about 17 bills that have been carried over for the Labor Committee over at the State House. It's a mix of concept drafts, bills with formal language already attached to them, and bills that have been tabled by appropriations. One thing that we've seen as a really common thread is a lot of these concept draft carryovers that have been coming through Obviously, with no language attached, these are really dangerous for the chamber and other special interest groups that are looking to get involved. And I know one thing that the chamber is kind of looking to tighten up with the administration and the legislature is to try to get those concept drafts tightened up a little bit. One of the examples for the Labor Committee that's going to be in that realm of concept drafts is LD 324, an act to prevent wrongful firing of Maine workers. While this is just a concept draft, our best guess is that this bill is an effort to put at-will employee status at risk. This would obviously be detrimental to the employer hiring strategy and does not really give the employer the flexibility to do what's best for their company. Chamber's also going to be keeping an eye on LD 1794, which is another carryover, an act to enhance the predictability of mandated overtime for pulp and paper manufacturing facilities. This bill places restrictions on mandatory overtime and schedule changes for employees of pulp or paper manufacturing facilities. And this includes that those facilities may not require an employee to work more than 2 hours of overtime per day and to give notice no later than 7 days before the scheduled overtime. The chamber's heard from stakeholders who have a list of concerns about this bill, including but not limited to employees having vacations canceled due to demand to fill vacancies, the inability to protect employees calling out 7 days in the future. It's really impossible to see into the future to know when that's going to happen, and creating unnecessary disadvantages in an already capital intensive, low margin business. Conversations, obviously with our partners at SAPI and at Twin Rivers, are going to be happening to make sure that we stay on top of this situation. For those of you that came over into this meeting from the MBART meeting this morning, you'll know that it was brought up at the end of the meeting about LD 1896, an act to index workers' compensation benefits to the rate of inflation, also known as the COLA bill, which would be based on the amount of increase in the consumer price index compiled by the US DOL and Bureau of Labor Statistics for the most recent 12-month period that's available. For an abundance of reasons, this is problematic. Maine has a high premium rates, and this act would only increase the cost of benefits under the Workers' Compensation Act. At the end of the day, we want to make sure work stays in the state of Maine in a competitive but not overbearing environment, and this law would do nothing but push businesses away, which obviously we don't want. Conversations have already been had and will be continuing with Elizabeth Brogan at the Workers' Compensation Coordinating Council to include the Management Caucus, as well as John Rode, Executive Director for the Workers' Compensation Board, to make sure that the chamber has a seat at the table in these conversations. Benefit adequacy is also something that's been brought up by Mr. Rode and in the Workers' Compensation Board meetings, and the chamber will be heavily involved in those meetings and conversations as well. In terms of the Labor Committee over in the State House, it's off to a little bit of a slow start compared to a lot of the other committees, with only 2 hearings scheduled so far, and only 2 bills up for discussion. January 16th, LD 2032, an act to improve Maine's labor laws by changing the laws governing elections of collective bargaining agents for certain public employees. That's the only bill being heard that day. And that's something that the chamber probably won't be involved with. And then January 23rd, LD 2149, an act to exempt seasonal volunteer ski patrollers and seasonal volunteer ski ambassadors and hosts at ski areas from the minimum wage laws. It's on my short list to be reaching out to chamber stakeholders about our involvement with this bill, so make sure all of you stay tuned for that as well. Big hot topic, obviously, for the last now kind of year plus is the rulemaking that's going to be starting for paid family medical leave under the direction of the DOL. The committee appointments are moving along for that DOL committee, and the informal listening sessions have already been scheduled. There is a link to the DOL on the DOL website that allows you to sign up for these listening sessions. The first being January 25th from 5:30 to 7 p.m. That time frame, 5:30 to 7, is going to be pretty standard for all these listening sessions, with the following dates after January 25th being February 1st, February 12th, and February 28th. Obviously, I will be having meetings and have already had meetings with Reggie over at DOL and making sure that our stakeholders here at the chamber are going to be heavily involved as much as possible with that rulemaking process. The weekly chamber labor and HR committee meetings, just so you all know, will be Fridays at 9:30 in the morning via Microsoft Teams. That's going to be kicking off tomorrow, where I'll be giving a more in-depth rundown of those 17 carryover bills in the Labor Committee. And I know that the email list that I have may be a little bit out of date in terms of people that want to be involved here in that committee meeting. So if anybody wants to be involved, feel free to shoot me an email, and I would love to hear your thoughts and opinions and make sure our participation is worthwhile. So that's kind of what's going on in the labor HR world here at the chamber. And I think I am turning this back over to Linda.
No, Patrick.
Well, thank you, Linda. Thank you, Ashley, and thank you, Jake. When I speak to members about the state of the Maine economy, there's optimism. There's optimism about where the state is going from a macro standpoint, but it includes a lot of risk looking through this year. And one theme that we're trying to ensure that the legislature is cognizant of is the Maine economy is very susceptible to risks that would change the trajectory of the state. Housing costs, labor shortages, as Jake articulated, there could be more acute pressures placed on the balance between labor and productivity that could be exacerbated with the paid family medical leave as well as pending legislation. There is a broad direction that I think the legislature could choose to meet the objectives, but with a practical implementation. And that's what the chamber will be focused on over these coming weeks. The buzz is back in Augusta, and we certainly want to integrate your perspective, what this legislation would mean to your business as we develop the testimony, as we develop the talking points, and ensure that the business is at the table when the final laws of this session are written. We did want to open it up for any questions to the advocacy staff at the chamber. And again, wanted to thank our sponsors, but moreover, thank the advocacy staff at the chamber for informing and presenting the business community's perspective in the legislature. So with that, please raise your hand if you have questions for the chamber staff. As people do that, I will add a few areas that we are encouraged to be working on new legislation. One that was not discussed is the New Americans Office. We held a webinar with the administration about a month ago. And honestly, it's an idea that as we talk about the labor shortage and the number of new Americans that are coming into Maine, to make sure that there is a process to integrate them into the workforce efficiently and effectively. We've had a number of members who have been really creating a template for success of integrating this new workforce. And the governor has issued an executive order to explore the development of a new office and is looking at submitting legislation to the legislature to establish this office. For a lot of larger businesses, they have the resources to establish the English as a second language programs, ensure that the work authorizations are consistent and compliant with federal law. And this new office is trying to bring visibility, but moreover, connect all of the activities at state government to work for new Mainers. That legislation, we are hopeful the Chamber, after review, is able to support, and appreciated the engagement from the administration. It's something that a number of red states and blue states have implemented, and frankly, I think the state of Maine should have established decades ago. Thought I saw a question in the chat here. Do you anticipate that there will be affordable housing land use bill this session? Maybe I'll turn to Linda to take that.
Yeah, I mean, there is a bond bill that is, I believe, before appropriations. Whether they're going to take up bonds, I don't know. I'm assuming there's going to be something though, in on affordable housing, but again, not sure.
The other aspect that I think that I've heard is, the legislature has been very active on housing, and also including zoning changes at the municipal level, that we are sort of at an implementation point where there needs to be discussion of how, whether it's ADUs that are now permissible, how do municipalities utilize the new law to actually build new housing that gets into financing. How do we really spur this marketplace? The law is there, but it's time for execution. So I think we are pivoting at the municipal level of some execution from what the legislature has passed. Additional questions for the chamber staff? And please use the group chat if helpful.
Now,
Paul. Paul, if you want to unmute yourself and ask your question. Maybe if you could type your question in the chat, and Mark, if you could assist with unmuting. As Paul does that, the other aspect that we held, as Linda mentioned, we held a roundtable lunch and learn with the legislature and a newly formed research and development caucus on Tuesday of this week, where Commissioner Johnson and the newly formed caucus, which includes Democrats and Republican leaders, started beginning to speak about the importance of prioritizing research and development within the state budget. There are a number of companies in the state of Maine that are doing world-class research and development. However, in aggregate, the state of Maine's total research and development investments as a percentage of the economy is really, unfortunately, an outlier in the wrong direction. Not only do we trail other New England states and the region, but similar situated states, rural states, are investing more research and development than the state of Maine. One authorized bond that was passed almost 5 years ago now leveraged millions of dollars in investment in companies across the Maine, including Jackson Laboratories, which is announcing has a ribbon cutting this morning for a new child care center where I know the governor is attending. But it signals that we need to leverage these investments now for long-term economic prosperity of tomorrow. Although it was 5-6 years ago that investment was made, we're seeing the impacts of that today. So that's another priority of the chamber. As Linda mentioned, we really don't have a stable R&D investment to leverage private capital in the state, and will be a priority going forward for the Maine State Chamber as we look at a surplus this year, but also for the governor's next biennial budget. Thanks for your patience, Paul. What is the basis behind the bills for corporate disclosure and abuse of dominance? Linda, do you want to take that, try to give a sense of the motivation between the sponsors?
We've seen these move across the states, the United States here. It's present in a lot of different states. A lot of these groups are trying to, I think, just corporate disclosure has been an issue for years. I mean, it's something that we see this in other states through the U.S. Chamber. We've seen this in a lot of different states around the country. I think it's just an effort to get information from companies. But with this bill, companies, when on their tax returns, they have proprietary information. They got cost of goods sold. They've got, numbers that they, issues like the investments that they're potentially making, capital expenditures. There's a lot of different proprietary information based on the tax return. And these groups just try to get it. I don't know what the genesis is. We've seen this in other states. So, it's just one of those bills that, is a kind of a perennial bill almost. It's almost like the tax haven bill. It's a perennial bill that shows up here and there. So.
One bill that we are following as well that was not mentioned is legislation that would prohibit the expansion of natural gas mains at the year 2025. This is a bill that the public advocate has introduced and has a public hearing scheduled for the 23rd of January. That bill, the purpose of that from the public advocate is to reduce risk of natural gas infrastructure that may not be consistent with the state's decarbonization goals. For those who have followed this issue, regionally, there have been a number of states that have looked at pursuing new natural gas policies in light of the decarbonization state laws. I will say that the legislation as drafted, I think, is an unproductive step in trying to create a coherent policy at both assisting manufacturing in the state and that requires natural gas service to be competitive globally. And secondly, that we create and integrate the technology that is consistent with our decarbonization plans. So the chamber regrettably will be testifying strongly in opposition with the legislation that was drafted, and would also encourage all businesses to consider the ramifications. If you do not currently have gas service at your business, the legislation would really preclude you from utilizing what American manufacturing and businesses have really had for wind behind their backs for the last decade and a half. So that is another topic that you'll be seeing the publicity about in the coming weeks. Mark, I'm not sure if we have any additional questions, but if not, I think we can conclude our briefing unless Jake, Ashley, or Linda, there's any additional comments you wanted to provide.
All set here.
Well, thank you again for all of those who made this event possible, our sponsors. Please reach out with further questions or comments. And really appreciate those who are partnering with us to try to improve legislation at the legislature that ensures the business community's voice is heard in Augusta. Thank you all.